there's only one God. And I believe in the afterworld. And I just want people to know that I'm very sincere in my beliefs. And I pray every night. And I don't ask for much. I just say thank you.
Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight for MTV Remembers Prince, streaming live on MTV's Facebook, MTV News Facebook, and MTV YouTube. I'm Jessica Hopper from MTV News.
I'm Doreen St. Felix, also from MTV News.
And I'm Meredith Graves, also here for MTV News.
Tonight we are celebrating the work and the life of Prince, who died today at his home in Chanhassen, Minnesota, Paisley Park, at the age of 57. His death has not been determined. The reason for his death has not been determined, though he had been treated recently when his plane landed in Chicago for the flu after flying home from his tour, where he was, I think his last show was in Atlanta about a week ago.
So we're going to begin with a statement from CeeLo, exclusive to MTV News. I want to be delicate, to not disturb our Prince's peace and eternal rest. I find myself being afraid, now feeling alone in the world without him. For I believe that he was dealing directly with the Creator on our behalf, ushering us a little closer toward salvation with each song. What I will miss most is that mediation with our Master. His confidence in doing so is the evidence that his even greater talent was the ability to listen to the Spirit and share shamelessly, unselfishly, and with so much style. He is now and forever immortalized as a noun, as I have often referred to him. Undoubtedly a person, a very special place, and absolutely everything. Undoubtedly a person, a very special place, and absolutely everything. Again, that was CeeLo with a prayer for Prince. And just thinking about the tributes and words that have come from so many celebrities who loved him. We also have a tweet from Questlove, who collaborated with Prince really often. And it's just 4 words, and it's "Long live the King." I think that's so apt, even though his name is Prince.
Yes. I think, a lot of the reactions tonight that we've seen online and, across social media have really been people saying, this is the person that, like, Prince was my guy. Prince was my guy. He was, as we heard in the CeeLo statement, that people considered him in a spiritual way, that it was more than just, I like this person's records, or that he's great live. Believing in Prince was believing in something bigger, believing in the possibilities of pop, of music, of being who you can be in every possible way, and I think he really empowered so many people to really live out their creative dreams. But that also, akin to David Bowie, he was someone who really, allowed for, made a huge pathway for weird people, for, he messed with gender. He put women first and forward in his music, not just in relation to him. He sung about, Darling Nikki with her magazine, and, Cynthia Rose and her lunchbox, and, Dorothy Parker works a night shift. Like, the women in his songs were really different than the kind of portrayals that they were normally getting in pop. I mean, he was absolutely one of a kind in that way.
Mm-hmm. Most of the tributes that I've seen so far have been people from across all genres saying over and over again, there are no words, there are no words, there are no words, which I think is particularly apt for someone who once legitimately changed their name to a symbol. He transcends language. He transcended genre, like he transcended gender, everything about him was so much larger than the medium that he used to transmit his messages. And so, like with Bowie, what I've been seeing are a lot of people on the internet saying, oh, it's fine, Prince has just gone home.
That's such a beautiful way of putting it. And I think also acknowledging that Prince changed his name in the late 90s to a symbol in response to the corporate wiles of the music industry. And I think so much of what you're seeing from not only celebrities but also fans who are really just leaning all the way in to his radicalism is that he was a symbol for, you know, being outside on the borders, being on the margins, as much as he was also the center of the pop genre, rock and roll, R&B.
And it's funny because a lot of people refer to it as the Prince symbol, but Prince himself actually referred to it as the love symbol.
Oh, yeah.
So if Prince, he was saying in such a direct way that seemed to just go so far over people's heads that if he was going to be represented by any symbol at all, it was going to be as love. Really, really intense. Really, really intense person. Really amazing.
Joining us now by phone from New York is ASAP Ferg. Ferg, are you there?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Oh, joining us via Skype. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Really wish we were talking to you under different circumstances. First off, how are you feeling?
You know, it was kind of sad when I first heard the news, and I couldn't believe it. It's sort of like when I first heard that Michael Jackson has passed. And I was in Harlem at the time, and I seen like everybody lining up in front of the Apollo and, you know, dancing and dressing like him. I'm pretty sure we're gonna. I'm in Hollywood right now. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna walk the strip and see a lot of Prince lookalikes in like about, you know, an hour or so. But you know, I think it's just a time to celebrate a great person's life. Because Prince was a really good person. You know, even though I was young at the time growing up, you know, my mother and my dad used to play a lot of his hits. I watched this movie, Purple Rain. And I know more than anything that he was an artist that was about the art, and he wanted to represent artist rights. He didn't want to be an artist that was getting taken advantage of. And I see a lot of artists standing up today and being independent, and, you know, he was one of the pioneers of doing that. So, you know, when it comes down to Prince, I look at Prince as you know, he dedicated his life to art and making music, and, you know, that's the reason why I love Prince. And besides that, just the fashion statements he used to make and going out there and just being himself, being free. I feel like, you know, he gave a lot of people guts to do that. It was sort of like glam rock in a sense. When you look at Young Thug today, you know what I'm saying, and you see, like, you know, guys dressing androgynistic a little bit, it's kind of like, you know, Prince started that. You know what I'm saying? That's his personal style. And, you know, he was just a pioneer. And I would, just like Q-Tip, say, long live the king.
Thank you for joining us, Ferg, and really appreciate you taking the time out to express your grief here with us. Now we have, let's talk about Purple Rain. I mean, that's sort of what, you know, even what Ferg was saying here is that, you know, all of the different ways that we came to know Prince and all of the things that he represented, so independent, so brilliant, so iconic, so singular in his style, his everything. But a lot of people's first introduction or primary introduction to him wasn't an album, was Purple Rain, which was a huge phenomenon, 1984, really hardly even the peak of his career, but really the point where he entered pop's mainstream as a true phenomenon. Have you guys seen this movie? Have you guys seen this movie?
Yeah.
A million times?
I think it's also, even just to talk about the soundtrack to that movie, which is one of the greatest film soundtracks of all time, I think that's just unassailable. Also, side note, Prince also did the soundtrack for Batman in 1989. But Purple Rain was recorded in Minneapolis. And I think so much of Prince's work that was both music and film, music and visuals, was about creating avatars for himself through this very, Midwestern Minnesota lens that ends up being queered in his hands. And I know that seeing Purple Rain affected me so deeply as a young black freak. There's no other way to describe myself as a child. And just sort of understanding that that was okay, and it was okay to build a fantasy world, and then to give that world a soundtrack, and then to make 2 other movies that might not have been as good, Under the Cherry Moon and Graffiti Bridge, that end up expounding on the original concept.
And for those interested, Purple Rain is playing on MTV right now, which is amazing because I feel like a lot of people who haven't seen it before may tune in tonight expecting to eulogize Prince, and they're going to be confronted with something incredibly dirty, which I feel like maybe what he would have wanted.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Unquestionably. So now let's take a look at some celebrity and fan reactions.
Yeah, so actually one of our fans mentions MTV with respect to Prince, and it's Andre Philly on Twitter. He says, I still remember MTV playing Raspberry Beret every hour, on the hour, when the video premiered. I couldn't stop watching. #Prince.
I think a lot of people, when you think about the 80s and who defined all that pop could be at that time, we talk about Madonna, we talk about David Bowie, obviously we've talked about David Bowie a lot this year. Yeah. But, I think some of the most memorable moments of true envelope pushing in the 80s were seeing Prince on awards shows, even on red carpets, the assless chaps.
The heels.
All of the ways where you're like, how is this real? I mean, I remember watching him on the American Music Awards and different award shows when I was 7, 8 years old, and just feeling like, oh my gosh, I should leave the room. I mean, I remember watching with my parents and feeling really kind of scandalized in a way.
Yeah.
But I also remember growing up in Minneapolis and going to go see Purple Rain, and every time a song would come on, everyone in the theater would sing along. I mean, think of another movie or even like a musical. I mean, granted, this probably doesn't happen at Hamilton, but and when was the last time America was so in love with essentially the musical theater of something like that, of something, this dramatization of what it meant to be an artist, of what it meant to be a musician. And Prince gave it to us in spades, whether it was, at these sort of like ceremonies where Prince got to be Prince, or in the movies that he was making, where he was, just inviting us into his totally awesome dream world of all that he was.
And I think people feel such intimacy with that kind of cinema. Actually, Purple Rain is now #2 on the iTunes music charts, which, speaks volumes.
Not surprising.
Of course.
Surprising.
Yeah.
Joining us on phone, by phone is POS from... Okay. We're going to actually go to a clip of Chris Rock interviewing Prince on performance.
Which writers, what other art forms have come into your music?
Comedians had a great deal of effect on my music, I think. It was always a challenge to be funny in music. It's always a challenge to have some sort of humor in a song and to make somebody feel good. That's the biggest challenge.
I don't lump people off. You're a singer, you're an author, you're a comedian. I lump us all into writers. I think we'd all rather sing, but most of us can't.
If we all continue working and we all continue growing, I think. I'm a musician. I live for that. I live for playing and creating songs.
If you're just joining us, we just saw a clip of Chris Rock interviewing Prince about the nature and inclusion of humor in his work. And I think that's something that everyone can agree on, is that Prince was really, really funny.
Hilarious.
Prince was hysterical.
Dave Chappelle, I think we need to talk about that.
The basketball
Of course. So basically the premise of this skit that Dave Chappelle did on his show, I think a little bit more than a decade ago, is that Prince is so good at basketball. And Eddie Murphy's brother is narrating the story of how Prince just like kills all the like big, tall, athletic men. Prince is famously short, or was famously short. And it ends with him making pancakes for the entire team. And the real clincher to this story is that Prince ends up using a photo from that skit for his album art a few years later, which is just like, incredible. I think that kind of like humor, his humility, his ability to kind of like poke fun at himself is just, it's so rare.
It's what liberated a lot of other musicians, I think, that were influenced by him over the years. I think the fact that he knew, you couldn't make music like the music he made unless you knew yourself so well. And to know yourself is to know all parts of yourself. And him as a spiritual person, I think, is where the ability to laugh at himself came from.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, we do see his legacy and hear his legacy in so many contemporary artists of today. You know, the recent Esperanza Spalding record where she basically transitioned out of jazz to something that is so deeply inscribed with Prince's influence, and taking on this other persona, actually, and channeling that, and really being, she's talked a lot in interviews about just being liberated by that, you know, and we hear it in, you know, everything from, you know, people's guitar solos, but also it's like we see it in even like, you know, the world of people like Grimes and on down to indie rock and electronic music where people are incredible shapeshifters, and that really his discography and all that he was a giant permission slip to say, you can do all of this.
And he himself got permission from the paragons of cool, and specifically black cool. And I was actually, you know, reeling this afternoon and was searching for some solace, and I found this amazing quote from Miles Davis's autobiography that came out in 1989. Miles Davis famously hated everybody, like even his own children. Like you can read that in the autobiography, but he loved Prince. And so this is a little snippet of him talking about him. He plays his ass off as well as sings and writes. He's got that church thing up in what he does. He plays guitar and piano, and he plays them very well. But it's the church thing that I hear in his music that makes him special, and that organ thing. It's a black thing and not a white thing. Prince is like the church to gay guys. He's the music of the people who go out after 10 or 11 at night. Isn't that so funny? Like, can you imagine Miles Davis in like the last couple of years of his life just dedicating this like space to Prince?
That's pretty immaculate. And also, you know, Prince had been working on his memoirs, which are now due out next year, in 2017. And that was reported fairly widely today, that he had been working on them in recent years. Mm-hmm. So who knows where those were left at, but hopefully they are finished and that we get them how they were.
And it's important to note that Prince had basically been a recluse for much of the 2000s, the early aughts. Mm-hmm. But he came out of that hole and has made 4 albums in the past 18 months, has performed. And I think that there's a parallel to be drawn with somebody like Frank Ocean, who also is about taking as much time as possible to make something beautiful. But today Frank surfaced, and he wrote a really just stirring tribute to Prince on his Tumblr that I'm going to read a little bit of right now. I'm not even going to say rest in peace because it's bigger than death. I never met the man. I was too nervous the one time I saw him. And I never saw him play live, regrettably. I only know the legends I've heard from folks and what I've heard and seen from his deep catalog of propellant, fearless, virtuosic work. My assessment is that he learned early on how little value to assign to someone else's opinion of you, an infectious sentiment that seems soaked into his clothes, his hair, his walk, his guitar, and his primal scream.
Wow. Very fitting tribute. Mm-hmm. Joining us on the line from Minneapolis is POS of Doomtree, a Minneapolis-based rapper who is going to talk to us about what's going on with him tonight. Steph, how are you?
Oh, good. I'm good. We got my happy 4-year-old around me, and he is definitely brightening the mood. But it has been a bummer day all day since we heard it this morning.
And how is the reaction in the Minneapolis music scene? Were you getting a lot of texts or calls from friends? I mean, as someone else who is from Minneapolis, I got a dozen texts today that were just, dude, or being like, oh my God. I mean, just people are beyond words. Can you talk to me a little bit about what's happening within the creative, Minneapolis music scene?
I mean, that was the first wave. Just like I think everybody's first wave was on Twitter, and everybody just hearing it from TMZ, and everybody saying, "Well, we're not going to believe it because it's from TMZ," And then everybody has to believe it, and then immediately I started getting phone calls like, "Hey, they're shutting down 7th Street over by First Ave, because First Ave is the spot where they shot Purple Rain, and it's his old club." And, his name's written in a star outside, so people have been, like, leaving piles of flowers and taping notes to the wall of the building, and it's, like, that street's shut down now. And I think that a bunch of different artists from the city, Lizzo, lots of people are out there right now. I think they're going to start playing Prince covers until the city shuts them down. Pretty much.
Very fitting tribute. And also, I saw that First Avenue announced that they're going to host an all-night Prince dance party. So maybe this is the beginning of it. And obviously, First Avenue, there's so many different places in Minneapolis and surrounding area that were became iconic because of Purple Rain. Steph, can you talk to us about what your personal touchstones are with Prince? What was the Prince album that really set you free into being inspired and loving him?
Oh, it was Purple Rain, hands down, no question. For the fact that it's a live album, learning more and more about it as I grow up, about how a lot of those were, first or second takes. Like, there's just, the dude's a genius. But as I grew up and got more interested in the craft of music, because I rap, but I started out playing guitar and stuff like that first. And I realized how good he was and searched back through his older catalog, and I don't know, man, it's Prince. There was always a battle growing up about Prince and Michael Jackson, and there's no question that Michael Jackson was like the entertainer, right? But Prince was a genius, man. He wrote amazing music, not just for himself, but for tons of other people. Classic songs. Purple Rain will make me cry, period, no matter what, whenever it comes on. If it's a quiet night, if it's a loud night, I make it all the way through the song. It's going to be tricky to throw them all back,
It's going to be hard to hear. It's going to be hard to hear all of the, today I got in a cab and, they switched through different stations and everything was all Prince, and it just felt like, in part because his music is so reverent and so alive, and, whether it's something like The Cross or Let's Go Crazy, it is still so absolutely alive, and it really, it's pretty crushing, to just feel and experience that when you're in just such a collective grief that I think is still hitting us. Well, thank you, Steph. Thank you for joining us, and wish we could be down in the street outside First Avenue right now celebrating Prince's life and work with everyone.
His life and music all night long. I know that there are people, there's people everywhere. It's going to be a beautiful night, I think.
Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
So we can't get to Minneapolis, but maybe we could go uptown to the Apollo Theater. I saw some people already chair dancing and having a great time up there.
And if you are in Minneapolis, you should know that on Sunday, Minneapolis City Hall will be playing Prince songs on their tower bells from 1 to 1:30 p.m.
Wow.
So if you ever wanted to hear Get Off rendered with church bells, Sunday might actually be your day.
That is on my bucket list. So next up, we have some more celebrity reactions. We've heard and seen things from people who are contemporary artists to, Lionel Richie, to Justin Timberlake,
to the
his
President
peers.
of the
Yes.
United States. So President Obama, he released a statement just a couple of hours into the news, and here it is. Today, the world lost a creative icon. Michelle and I join millions of fans from around the world in mourning the sudden death of Prince. Few artists have influenced the sound and trajectory of popular music more distinctly, or touched quite so many people with their talent. As one of the most gifted and prolific musicians of our time, Prince did it all: funk, R&B, rock and roll. He was a virtuoso instrumentalist, a brilliant band leader, and an electrifying performer. So that, again, that was the President of the United States.
And right now we're going to go to another great bit from our vault. Prince being interviewed by MTV's Sway here at Webster Hall on April 20th, 2004, after a performance.
I feel that music is a blessing. I don't feel that I'm working. So when I'm not, quote unquote, working, I'm thinking about it. I'd like to believe that I have it pretty well mastered. I'm always learning, though. I like to believe that it's infinite, too. It's obvious that there's an agenda against the disenfranchised and the uneducated. So ultimately, I think to counter that, we're going to have to talk to one another. One of the ways we used to do that was through our music. I grew up with the staple singers and Curtis Mayfield and Marvin Gaye's What's Going On and stuff like that. And that particular sound, you know, the sound of the people, to voice our concerns in those areas is gone now. The music's geared towards kids, and it's made by kids. So to really discuss some of these issues with a great sense of wisdom, it's going to be a little tricky. And you've got to live life before you can really talk too much about it. No, every day I'm satisfied. Every day I feel it's a blessing from God, and I consider it a new beginning. So, yeah, everything's beautiful.
What we just saw was a 2004 interview between Sway and Prince backstage after a show at Webster Hall. And it really speaks to Prince's relationship with the communities that he was surrounded by almost at all times. He would reach out and make himself a part of different places where he felt like there were people in need that he could help. He was an incredibly generous guy, but he didn't always feel the need to be really blatant about it.
At all. Prince was a man of cities. We've been talking about Minneapolis, but we should also talk about Baltimore. So, I mean, it almost feels cosmic that this is also the one-year anniversary of the death of Freddie Gray, who was an unarmed black man, basically arrested for running while in his skin. And when he was transported in the police van, his spine was severed, and he died a couple of days later, I believe. And Prince was one of the only artists to take it upon himself to bring celebration through mourning, actually, to the city of Baltimore. And he released a single, and it was called Baltimore, and it has a really just devastating lyric. Does anybody hear us pray for Michael Brown or Freddie Gray? And we were talking about Prince and spirituality earlier, and I think the fact that he was able to tap into the spirituality of the Black Lives Matter movement, even though he is of a different generation. So Prince, when he talks about his radicalism, especially rooted within the black church and black music, he talks about Curtis Mayfield, he talks about Marvin Gaye, because that was, you know, where he came from. And the fact that he was able to sort of gift my generation with that, black millennials, just feels, I'm so grateful that he was able to, you know, give us a soundtrack, give us a hymn. And he also actually did a rally in Baltimore, and the police presence was so heavy around Freddie Gray's passing. And Prince was one of the people who was like, you know what, like, fuck the police. Like, I'm going to come in and give the people what they need. And it seems very apt that in our mourning of Prince that we're laughing and we're dancing and we're celebrating, because that's the way Black mourning goes. It's about the impossible confluence of joy and pain, life and death, sadness and jubilance. And I'm so happy that he was able to give us that before he left us.
I'm not surprised to hear him cite Curtis Mayfield, who I think is, you know, the closest thing to Prince before Prince. You know, who in a similar way, you know, He had his own label. He raised up so many proteges and people that he brought up with him. You know, he had bands, but he also was solo. And, you know, he was an incredible producer.
Soundtrack films.
Yes, soundtrack films. And, you know, you can really connect something like Move On Up and songs that were incredibly conscious and, you know, even like People Get Ready and things like that, to some of the songs on Sign of the Times, and had an incredible consciousness and were, you know, the thing is, it's like sometimes, you know, we love political music purely sort of in theory. We love it on paper. But Prince made you be able to be in the club and hear these things and hear, you know, Sign of the Times and talking about AIDS at a time where the President of the United States had barely even acknowledged it, when it was still being acknowledged as only as, like, you know, gay cancer.
Of course.
And he put it as the title track on this masterful double album that just brings you into his world. And that is an album that, like Curtis Mayfield, it is about joy, it is about mourning, it is about identity, agenda, sex, all of it. I mean, for me, that's my favorite Prince album, and that was, I discovered it, you know, in tape in my mom's Walkman, you know, like that was, and it felt very illicit listening to it, and that was, you know, kind of one of my first introductions to Prince beyond just the pop hits, you know, were things like Dorothy Parker and Starfish and Coffee, which, like, I don't even think about listening to those. I don't think I could do it without crying. And so right now joining us by phone is John Carmonica, the pop critic for the New York Times. John, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey guys, what's up? How are you?
We are here. We are here. Wish we were not, or under different circumstances. So how did you first find out about Prince's passing? Were you skeptical from this? We've heard some people say that they were skeptical from the initial TMZ report and were waiting for the second or third confirmations. What was
I mean,
your
TMZ has
reaction?
a very good reputation, so I wasn't overly skeptical, but as you know, Prince has had some health problems in the past few days. You know, he had the issue with the emergency flight landing, and also he had to cancel a couple of shows maybe about a week or 2 weeks ago. So something has been in the air that I think no one had really put a finger on. So when I saw the initial report, I thought there was a good chance that it was real.
Yeah, I think for us, even it was, we were in the newsroom here and we were just sort of, it's TMZ, okay, there's a probably really good chance, but I think all of us even kind of hung back, wanting it to be just in disbelief that, you know, we don't, you know, as we had someone on earlier tonight saying, Prince seems like he's forever. There's something eternal about Prince. What do you think Prince's legacy is in terms of pop right now? What do you think his legacy, when we look at him 20 years from now, what are going to be the things that we identify that he left with us?
I think, I don't want to say we're in a totally Prince moment, because I think one of the signature aspects of Prince's legacy is how sort of unfollowable he is. He's so specific and so free that I think artists who have sort of been influenced by him have taken bits and pieces and incorporated into what they do. But Prince was so singular that it's hard to be like, well, here's 5 people who are just fully imbibing Prince. But, you know, if you see Prince, you guys talked about this earlier, you know, you see Prince in Kanye, you see Prince in The Weeknd, you see Prince really anywhere Black pop's fringes, and increasingly at its center. But it's something that, you know, no one person has really taken everything that Prince has done. I mean, it's important to remember Prince is a master producer. He's a musician who plays a couple dozen instruments. The type of music and art that he made is so specific to his era that it's unlikely that anyone of the modern era would really be ever able to totally wear his shoes, and also unable to wear his actual shoes, which were pretty amazing.
And, you know, one of the things that we were touching on is, you know, this incredible dichotomy that was sort of his and his alone of being both very sexual and very spiritual. And I think it's rare that we see someone master both of those with such incredible depth. Can you speak to, Prince's, on-record sexuality, like all that he gave us as a sensual person?
Well, to tie that into something that, Doreen, you were reading maybe a few minutes ago from, I think it was Miles's biography, autobiography, and Miles talking about the influence of church music in Prince. And I think when Prince started, we're talking late 70s, early 80s, we're not that far from the classic soul era. There are these sort of tentacles of the 60s and the early 70s that reach into Prince's early work, and there's that, it's church music both in texture and also partially in content. And Prince very vocally over the years talked a lot about spirituality and talked a lot about God. He also referred to himself as God. Prince was not a guy who was always the most consistent as far as practices and beliefs. And so that was something that he embraced rather intensely, but I don't think he saw his spiritual self and his sexual self as being divided. I think he understood his sexual presence or sensual presence as an extension of his spiritual presence. I can't imagine he would have made an argument about how the two things were at odds. I think he would have said that they are basically all coming from the same life force, for lack of a better term.
And you can even hear that in, like the B-side of Around the World in a Day, where they are literally sitting side by side, these incredibly sexual songs, and then, The Ladder and Cross, and all of these songs that are really incredibly, they're songs of devotion, but they're just about being devoted to different things, different agendas in a similar way. Can you talk a little bit about just the last decade of Prince, and that we see in the last 2 years this incredible sort of resurgence of his music, some of which I think people haven't heard because it was on Tidal, or, at points he had, I think, a subscription through his website, that things were hard to find. You couldn't just pull them up on YouTube. Can you talk a little bit about sort of his disappearance and resurgence?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the signature frames that we have to look through Prince's creative life is control and ownership. This is something that he struggled with throughout the 80s and early 90s as far as his relationship with his record label. Eventually, over time, he did gain control of all his master recordings, which is something that is very, very uncommon in the music business. But when people say, oh, Prince has been, in retreat or in hiding or whatnot, it's really, in my mind, it's always been he's been choosing to live on his own terms outside of the sort of the systems that we ordinarily associate with music, which is what we cover in our lives. We have a set understanding of what the major label system looks like and what major distribution looks like. Prince was an OG cult artist, an OG pop cult artist, where he had fans, where he could release something on a dedicated website or behind a subscription service wall, and the people who are most passionate about Prince, who were really the only people at a certain point that he was interested in serving, those people would find it. And in that way, he was way, way ahead of generations of artists right now who are starting to build similar structures of releasing direct to their fans. Prince was doing this 20 years ago. And so the last decade, really after his induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he made another sort of go at mainstream record label, Musicology in 2004, which was his highest profile record in quite some time. But I think what he realized is he liked to work at his own pace. He liked to bring people to work in his studio on his songs at his rhythm, and that doesn't always jibe with the needs of an Interscope or Universal Music Group entity. And so as long as he could put records out when he wanted to put records out, I don't think Prince worried one bit about where it was going to end up as long as his fans could get it.
He was absolutely someone that did it on his own terms at all times. Thank you, John Caramonica from the New York Times, for joining us tonight. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I know you're busy and on deadline for your own Prince piece. Joining us now by phone is Dawn Richard, who is an artist that should not be unfamiliar to MTV audiences because of her past here, but also because about 3 weeks ago we ran a large profile on her, an incredibly original artist who no doubt has taken some inspiration from Prince. Thank you for joining us tonight, Dawn. How are you?
I'm great. Literally about to catch a flight, but I did not want to miss speaking about this. I'm so saddened by losing someone so amazing, but happy that we can celebrate his art and it lives on continuously.
And, can you talk about his influence on you?
If anyone knows me as an artist, they know that they can directly see Prince's influence. From being independent and his push on innovation and his choice to do things on his terms, his love of himself and this kind of freedom that he has always kind of put out there in this very unapologetic way is definitely a direct influence into my music, fashion, and really even the way I am as an entrepreneur today.
And what was your introduction to Prince? What's your touchstone?
Actually, I'm born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, and my mother actually asked me to come to a Prince concert or a festival one of his shows at Essence Festival, and I was reluctant, didn't really know much coming into it. I was very young, but my mom thought I'd like him. Literally one song in, I was hooked, and I never looked back after that, and I fell in love with. I was more of a fan of his work that most people, records that they didn't know as well, like Something's in the Water, and his film, his take on film. Like I just thought Under the Cherry Moon was brilliant, and I thought Purple Rain was brilliant to do as well, and I just loved that he had did the Batman soundtrack. I thought it was genius the way he sonically created that entire soundtrack, and those were the things that I loved about him the most. I love that he played literally all of his instruments, and I love the way he scored and created an era, not just his music, but an entire era from Sheila E. to Vanity to The Time. Like, he created an actual sound that lasted and is still lasting today.
Absolutely. And also he was an artist that, really broke a lot of boundaries in terms of how he played with gender, how he played with identity, how he front-loaded sexuality into his music. Was that important for you?
Absolutely, especially as a girl who, grew up in music and grew up from New Orleans, Louisiana. There's an appreciation of not only identity but the blurred lines. I grew up in a city where we had transgender bounce music artists who were quite popular. From, Katie Red and artists like Big Frida, who we were having transgender artists, and we were totally fine with that growing up. And so there was an appreciation that I felt and loved with Prince because I never had to question. I didn't care if what he wore. Like, we loved him. He was still sexy to me in ruffles. He was still sexy to me in heels. And I think we all struggled with that because we were kind of like, why do we love him so much? And why is he still sexy dressing this way? And I love that he pushed that limit. I think he and a few other artists only pushed that boundary to make us feel something uncomfortable. And to me, art is making people feel uncomfortable. It's making you feel things you've never felt before. And I think Prince had a way with doing that. And not only did he do it visually, but he did it in his voice. Singing in falsetto and every so often, falling into his natural, into his bass tone, and really making you realize, oh, he can sing. He's actually not just playing every instrument. Oh, he's not just looking and dressing this well. This man is actually a genius. And so you were forced consistently to have to realize, this man is not what I'm used to, and I'm absolutely loving it. And I think people were really confused by it at first, and then after a while, we just had to get on his train because it wasn't changing.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us tonight, Dawn Richard, via phone, about to catch a flight. Thank you for making time for us on MTV Remembers Prince.
I would make time for Prince any day. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think sexuality, it feels so it's perfect that that's the last thing we're going to talk about when it comes to Prince. At 57 years old, he was still probably one of the sexiest people on earth. Sometimes I feel like I don't want to just call Prince a man because he encompassed everything. And we actually have a clip of him. This interview is from 1985, and he's talking to Steve Fargnoli about, He's talking about his world tour in 1997. He's at the Millennium Hotel in New York City and talking about his sexuality.
What was it that you were listening to in music today that made you say, I've got to put some more stuff out there? You have to do this.
Mainly I sensed a great deal of negativity and entropy in the music. There's a disintegration going on that we really have to address. Our values have been lessened to a great degree. VH1's been pretty cool. They don't show too much craziness on their channel, but other Viacom channels do. So I think that we should address this as a community as to what it's doing to the culture. People can say all they want to, that there's no reason for these kids to listen to music and then go shoot somebody, but you know, there's something that's triggering these buttons.
Do you feel responsible as an artist
Very
for
much so.
what you're putting? Do you think that other people do?
No, I don't.
You talk about music that's going out there right now. Are you talking about any particular type of music that you don't think is such a positive influence?
Well, it's very obvious when you hear words and lyrics, whether they enlighten or discourage.
Okay, so hip-hop gets slammed a lot. Marilyn Manson gets slammed. Korn gets slammed. A lot of those acts that are, out there putting... Is that what we're talking about?
It's not what I'm talking about.
No?
I'm just talking about the truth.
Just general?
Yeah. The truth is that you either are here to enlighten or discourage.
Do you feel like you obviously, you've grown a lot and you've changed since 1982 and the 80s when you were putting out music, but you were always thought of as somebody who was putting out extremely sexual music. Mm-hmm. Is that a problem to you, or are you talking more about the profanity?
Yeah, sexuality is not bad.
No.
I'm talking about sexuality is very spiritual in nature, and that's a God-given gift too. I'm talking about just plain disintegration, where you're not even speaking the truth anymore, and the violent imagery that's permeated society and our music now. And sampling is getting to the point where it's out of hand too. I mean, pretty soon we'll be sampling the sample that was already sampled.
Somebody was joking saying Mariah Carey had sampled herself on the latest album. How do you measure your success? Who
was the rapper? Master P said, "Only God can judge me." There it is. Only God can judge me.
All right.
Prince's sexuality was so notorious also that it became an often used cultural referent no matter what medium he was being discussed in. Mm-hmm. And so, you see a lot of people, I mean, look at us, we're like, let's finally get to the part where we can talk about Prince and sex, because we have all of these impactful moments, but it's weird. I grew up with Prince as a guitarist, and I was obsessed with him, and I loved him, but the first time I remember seeing Prince's sexuality referenced in an explicit manner was on Animaniacs. Do you remember that? Does anyone else remember that?
Definitely not.
On Animaniacs, and this is something, it was a viral internet article that went around a little while ago about the raunchiest joke that cleared the censors on Animaniacs, which was a joke where one of the Animaniacs looked at the others and made a reference to collecting fingerprints, and it popped over to a cartoon version of Prince, and he's just like... So, even that slipped past the censors, but Prince's sexuality was so notorious that a fingerprints joke actually made it onto a children's cartoon.
The thing with Prince and his relationship to sexuality, which also dovetails into his relationship with gender, is that it was so coy, it was done with such a wink, that people just didn't understand what was happening. There hadn't been that many, it wasn't like there was a cadre of black men from the Midwest wearing assless chaps in the 80s and the 90s. There was no precedent. And I think for me, being a black person, discovering Prince just correlates with me discovering my own sexuality. Everyone's parents loves Prince, even my extremely religious West Indian parents. So it happens that, you're watching a concert or you're listening to his music in the car, and because your parents aren't scandalized in the way that they might be with women performing the sexuality, you end up it ends up diffusing to you. And I think actually Jane Coaston, who is one of our incredible writers at MTV News, wrote a piece about her queerness and relationship to Prince. Here's a quote from that piece, and it says, Purple Rain, he plays the kid, and he does so while grinding on stage to a song about a woman masturbating to a magazine in a hotel lobby. That song is why we have parental advisory stickers, by the way, because Prince was dirty as hell and very pretty, all at once. He wanted to be just as gorgeous as any woman, and then he wanted to get with her. There's actually a recurring meme on the internet. I don't know if you guys have noticed it, but it's kind of like something to the effect of, Prince could steal your girl in your girl's clothes.
I haven't seen this one.
Well, you need to
It's true.
You need to Google it. It is true. And I think thinking about the context that he was coming out of, we're talking about post-civil rights, the sexual revolution of the 70s that was very much like white and westernized in the way that it was, consumed by people. And then the 80s happen, and you have extremely asexual black pop stars. You have Lionel Richie, you have Michael Jackson, and then you have Prince, who completely explodes the lid off of that. And sex in pop music is never the same after him. Sex as it manifests through fashion, as it manifests through hair. He had this Jerry curl. On everybody else, the Jerry curl looked absolutely ridiculous, but on him it was sexy and wet, soft and wet, sweaty. And I don't want to lose his eroticism in this moment of honoring an obituary. Some of these things that are not necessarily, they don't speak to legend in the way that we normally do. Sometimes they get kind of thrown by the wayside when we're memorializing someone, but I think eroticism is just at the core of any understanding of Prince as a political person, as a business person. All of it was about staying as close to his body as possible, and also other women's bodies a lot.
Yeah, we don't normally eulogize people by talking about how hot they were. But I think in this case, obviously, we cannot avoid... To work around that would be to miss Prince entirely. I remember listening to Little Red Corvette and getting to this point where, he's talking about, pocket condoms, and some of them are used. And I was like... I remember my young brain just being flummoxed, is someone really walking around with pockets full of Greta used condoms? Is it the rapper? And really thinking a lot, probably way too much about it, since I just barely knew what condoms were in the first place.
The one that knocked it out of the park for me was when he described a undefined sex toy as a box with a mirror and a tongue inside. If we're going to eulogize him via his eroticism, it's almost like a James Joyce moment in that regard. He really was a poet as much as a lyricist, and that was Joycean in its execution. It just got really surreal and sketchy in a way that woke us up before we knew we were awake.
Yeah, and dirty as hell.
And it always felt safe, too, which is one of the things I appreciated about Prince. It was never, his femininity and his size were constantly evoked in parodies of him, but especially for me, growing up socialized female, seeing a man with sexual agency who didn't need to be menacing or aggressive about it, seeing someone who obviously believed and made implicit in his lyrics and his music that sex should be satisfying and consensual and as focused on your partner as it is on you. That was instructive in a way that really did transcend the physical realm. It was wonderfully physical, but it was also, there was a tertiary quality there. By listening to Prince, you consummated your relationship with Prince, and then there was that third side to the triangle where your relationship with him existed absent of form.
And as central as his body was to his music, to his art, to everything about the man, he's left. We don't have his body anymore, but we do have his music. We do have his concept, we have his legacy, we have his irreverence, and I think it's just important to take that with us as we go on.
So we have to bring our living tribute
To
a close. Thank you for joining us. This has been MTV Remembers Prince. I'm Jessica Hopper.
I'm Doreen St. Felix.
And I'm Meredith Graves.
And for a final clip, a very special one too, Prince's first televised interview. He had done another one before, Dick Clark, but he basically
Ignored him.
He basically ignored him. So this one is actually actual interview. Prince's first TV interview. Steve Fargnoli interviews Prince alongside the extras from his music video on November 13th, 1985. This was the singer's first interview for television. The questions were provided by MTV News. So there you go. Thank you for joining us.
You're about to see Prince in his first interview for television. Now, he took a stab at being interviewed in print a few months ago, but this is the first time Prince has ever agreed to talk in front of cameras. The questions were provided by MTV's news department, and the person you'll hear asking them, at Prince's request, is his manager, Steve Fargnoli. Now, Prince is not alone here. The interview was shot at the filming of his new video, America, and the people that you're going to see with him are extras from the video. For the first time on television, this is Prince.
One thing I'd like to say is that I don't live in a prison, and I'm not afraid of anything. I haven't built any walls around myself. I'm just like anyone else. I need love and water. I don't really consider myself a superstar. I live in a small town, and I always will, because I can walk around and be me. That's all I want to be. That's all I ever tried to be. I didn't know what was going to happen. I tried to do my best. And if somebody dug it, then I believe in God. There's only one God. And I believe in the afterworld. And hopefully, we'll all see it. Been accused of a lot of things contrary to this. And I just want people to know that I'm very sincere in my beliefs. And I pray every night. And I don't ask for much. I just say thank you.